Hello and welcome to my basic Alear guide. In this guide, I'm going to be going over early game classes and engravings, as well as skills you might want to use on Alear for different builds. This is a Maddening guide. This is for Maddening. It will also work in other difficulty settings. It'll just make them way easier because it'll be min-maxing your Alear. To begin, Alear is a dragon type at all times, regardless of class. So whenever something is effective versus dragons, you will be taking increased damage because you are always a dragon. Different classes give different modifiers. So, for example, this Alear is a wyvern knight. So, you get effective versus dragons from being a wyvern or being on Alear. And then you also get effective versus flying, meaning that if things hit you, like a bow shoots you, it's now effective against you. So, it's just something to keep in mind. So, if you see like a worm slayer, it's always effective against you. But aside from that, Alear has pretty good growth rates. The main standout ones that you really need to know are 35% strength, 45% dex, 50% speed, 40% defense. So this matters because 50% speed on fixed mode is 5 points of speed per 10 level ups at base, meaning like without adding in class modifiers. So, for example, if you go to Wyvern, you get plus 5% more speed and plus 20% more strength growth, which puts Alear at 55% strength growth and 55% speed growth, meaning that you'll get 5.5 levels every 10 level ups on fixed. The 0.5 doesn't count, it's just like as you hit so many levels, eventually it will become a complete point. So, if you level up 20 times, it's 11 points of speed and strength. With that being said, let's talk about Alear's passive. So, Divinely Inspiring. This allows Alear to boost damage of adjacent allies, and this damage ignores armor. So, if you have an ally that hits 0 damage on something, it'll guarantee that they hit at least a 3. So, if you take an ally that can double with a Brave Weapon and sit them next to Alear and have them attack an enemy armored unit that tanks that damage, they will deal at least 12 damage. So pretty useful. It also reduces damage taken by 1. Very good passive, really good to make use of for scaling damage of your allies. So let's talk about classes. What classes should you really be going for? So you can stay in the default advanced class, which is just Divine Dragon. It's decent. It's definitely, in my opinion, not as good as some of the other ones, but you can beat a run on Maddening with this pretty easily. Another class that you could run is Swordmaster. This is viable on Alear. It gives you some good speed. It gives you strength and speed growth, both of which are useful. So you can run that. To be specific, though, it gives you 10% extra strength growth, putting you at 45, and then 20% speed growth, putting you at 70% speed. So you could run crit builds. You could just be a fast sword user. You would still get enough strength levels where you could one round most things or deal really high damage. So you can't go wrong with that. Hero is a viable option. I'm not a huge fan of Hero. It's not bad, but you could run it if you want to. Halberdier is always good on any unit. It basically can guarantee that it doubles with its pincer attack ability, so you could run this if you want. General, I don't recommend running on Alear. You're just throwing out that speed, so there's really no reason to run General or a Great Knight. I would skip those. Paladin could be good. It has decent speed growth. It actually has plus 15%, so you'd be at 65% speed growth, and it has plus 15% strength, so you would be at 50% strength growth. So Paladin's viable, you could run it. It's pretty solid. All right, and then we have Royal Knight. Royal Knight is a weird one. I don't like its passive. Its passive's kind of strange, but it's decent. You could run it if you want to. It's definitely not one of the standout builds that I would recommend. Berserker, you could make a decent Berserker. Berserker does add 10 to build growth, so 10%. So you would be plus 15% build growth, and on fixed mode, that would be 1.5 build levels per 10 levels, or 3 points of build per 20. And throughout a Maddening run, you will generally hit like level 30 to like 45 based on, you hit level 20 and then you second seal, you hit level 20 and you usually hit like 30 to 40. So you would reasonably see some build increase from running Berserker over time. You could potentially double. Axes are heavy and inaccurate, though, so you have to account for that. Same thing for Warrior, but you also have access to bows, so you could run Warrior. Sniper, I wouldn't recommend running. Same thing with Bow Knight. I don't really see the upside on Alear. You could have other units be your archers. I think there's better things to run on Alear specifically. Great Knight in general I would skip. Paladin I already went over. Wolf Knight. Alear could be a decent Wolf Knight. The only problem with Wolf Knight is it doesn't really give you that much strength. It gives you 5% more strength, so you just be at 40% strength growth. It does give you 20 speed though. It also gives you 20 luck and res. So your luck and res would both be at 45%. You could run Wolf Knight. You could run it with sword if you want. I would rather be on Paladin for the higher base strength, but it could be viable. And daggers are a good weapon type, so you could reasonably get away with running Wolf Knight. Griffin Knight, I do highly recommend. Sword Griffin Knight is very strong on Alear. Its base strength is decent. It's not as good as Wyvern. Wyvern's a little bit stronger, but it gives you access to staves, and it gives you one of the better passives that allows you to have your land units move through terrain that costs more than one movement easily. It essentially makes a plus shape, so like adjacent tiles and the tile the Griffin Knight stands on have a movement cost of 1. So if you're on like water or forest or pillars, you can clear the way. So that's why it's called that. Wyvern, very strong. Honestly, I think Wyvern might be the better of the two, just because it has increased strength growth. So Griffin Knight, and this is my third Maddening run, and I've run Griffin Knight once on Alear and then Wyvern once. Griffin Knight, you have plus 10% strength growth, but plus 20% speed, so you're extremely fast. So you have 70% speed and then 45% strength. This is still completely viable, and you can completely be, a Griffin Knight the entire run. But with Wyvern, you get 20% strength. You also get more HP. You get plus 20% HP growth, putting you at 80% HP as opposed to 60. But you get 55% strength growth on Wyvern, and then you still have 55% speed. You also get more defense. You get 60% defense growth, and you get plus 5% more build, putting you at 10% build. And 10% build is 1 point of build per 10 levels. That's pretty big upside. That's a few points. That's like 2 to 3 extra points of build. And then on top of that, Wyvern has higher build. Now, Griffin does have 2 more speed at base though. So that does actually matter, because that's essentially like having 2 more builds. So Griffin is still faster in that way. And with the speed, it will offset a lack of build. But the increased strength means more damage. Now it's a difference of plus 10% more. So basically an extra point per 10 levels. So one is more optimized towards utility and hard focusing on a single weapon and speed, and the other is focused on versatility. So with Wyvern, what you can do is you can run sword and lance, and that gives you access to lances, which are higher base damage, so that you can have a lance to poke and break enemy swords. You have swords to break axes, and you can equip lances against other lance users so you don't get broken. So you become more flexible. But both are really strong, and I would say these are the best options, personally. I don't see any downside to running either of these. They're very strong. And Wyvern is very flexible, and so is Griffin. Griffin is more utility. Wyvern is more combat flexibility. But the damage is very similar, and the stats long-term are very similar. Griffin just has more speed. Wyvern just has slightly more strength. But both are very good, and both are endgame ready. Okay, so that's classes out of the way. So let's talk about... Actually, let's do this because we're already here. Let's talk about skills to invest in. This is early to mid game. So I'm just going to consider the first emblems you get. I'm not including DLC. I might make a follow-up to include DLC. A lot of the DLC straight up breaks the game, so I don't care to run it. But okay, so you can go for an avoid build by running Marth. You can quickly unlock avoid plus 10 in Perceptive, which gives you insane amount of avoid when attacking. Perceptive gives you plus 15 avoid, and then also scales even further with high speed. And then when you stack this with avoid plus 10, you're looking at a minimum of plus 25 avoid, plus the scaling of Perceptive. And also, you're going to be high speed because you always have at least 50% speed growth. So this is a pretty good combo that I used in my first run that was very strong. Another thing you could get is Sword Agility. You would want Sword Agility 2, because it gives you plus 15 avoid. Notice how plus 15 avoid costs 1.5k SP. Sword Agility 2 only costs 1k SP, but you do get crit minus 10. So that's the difference between them. One is pure upside, one is cheaper but has a downside. Then avoid plus 20, pretty expensive to get. Sword agility, less so, but it's same thing. 500 SP cheaper, but you have the minus crit. So, but avoid can be really good, like early game, especially if you get in some trees. Like even just avoid plus 10 is really strong, and you can run it. For Celica, I don't think you should run any of these. I don't think you should put Alear on magic. 20% magic growth, you should avoid it. All right, Sigurd, Cantor is an obvious one. Cantor is very strong. It's always good. Hit plus 10, I don't think you need. You're pretty accurate on swords. This is one you can skip. Lance power, you could run if you plan on using lances, but this early into the game, I don't recommend investing in this. And you would barely be able to use it because you'd have to second seal into, Spear, Wyvern, or Griffin, or something else like Halberdier. All right, Leaf. The build, you shouldn't need it because you're on swords and spears. If you go to axes, you could become like an axe Griffin or an axe Wyvern with swords or whatever. And then you can make use of build. You could also just get speed on Lyn later on, but it's okay. You could run it if you want to. Knife precision, you could run if you wanted to go the Wolf Knight route. So that's an option. Arm shield, I don't recommend. Strength plus 1 isn't bad, but there's definitely better things. Sword power plus 1 costs 1k SP. It's going to be hard to get. You generally have around like 1 to 1.3k SP like before chapter 10. And at chapter 11, you lose all of your emblem rings temporarily for a few chapters. So that matters. So you can't get some of these early on. So getting like sword power early, you could do it, but I don't recommend it. There's better things to get. Micaiah, pretty much none of these are useful to you, so you can skip it. Or I'm sorry. Who did I skip? Oh, it's everyone. Okay. Oh, yeah. I forgot to mention momentum. I'm trying out momentum in this run. I got momentum instead of Cantor. Momentum is good. It gives you plus damage based on movement. So if you're on Wyvern, you have 6 movement. So you can deal up to plus 6 damage just by like diving stuff. So if you have a bunch of units with momentum, theoretically you could dive enemy positions more effectively with more damage output. And that's what I'm going to be testing. But momentum is a strong ability. And I don't know that it's better than Cantor, but it is really strong. And you could run this, and it is viable. Now, if you use boots on a unit, like if I use boots on Alear and I get to 7 movement, I can hit up to plus 7 damage. And you can also do a thing where you wrap around an enemy. So like let's say you're standing right next to an enemy, right? You can still make use of momentum if that's the target you want to hit. You move left, up, right, or you do either direction. So you move one tile. Let's say you move one tile to the right, one tile up, another tile up, and a tile to the left. That's plus 4 damage on momentum just for circling around an enemy. That's like even if you're standing right next to it, you can still make use of it. So pretty huge skill, pretty good. That's good on literally all the classes too. All right, so that's the avoid tanking stuff. That's the increases to damage and like Cantor and stuff like that. So let's talk about engravings and weapons. Early game, there's really not too much. You don't really have a good selection of weapons. You're pretty much going to be using swords or lances, I would say, on Alear. Maybe daggers. Early game daggers, you can just buy iron daggers and upgrade them to steel. But before chapter 10, there's really not much. Like on chapter 10, you get steel daggers finally, but then, all the other crazy stuff happens that pushes you into the middle game. But for your early things, I would say Wadao from donation can be good for Brody at level 3. Steel Sword plus 3 is really strong with beginnings. Liberation plus 3 to plus 4, depending on how high you can get it. With beginnings is really strong on Alear. Liberation and Steel Sword with beginnings are viable throughout an entire run. Wadao should be viable throughout most of a run, if not an entire run. Upgrading things like Armor Slayer can be useful situationally, but this isn't going to be like your mainline weapon on any build, so I would skip that. And then for spears, Steel Lance is really good. Can't go wrong with this. Upgrading it with Sigurd's emblem is quite strong. So there's always that. I don't recommend upgrading any iron or slim anything ever. I don't think it's worth it. And then for other things, like other spears you might consider, you could throw like Rider's Bane on Alear, but The main thing you want is like a weapon that you can always use, and then you want your utility weapons, and you can upgrade them when you can. Like you could upgrade this to like +3 when you have excess resources, but I don't recommend upgrading it a ton early on unless there's a specific reason for doing so. But like, you know, Steel Sword, Liberation, those are the main ones I would focus on. And then for spears, just Steel Lance. And then if you wanted to branch out to axes, you could Steel Axe could be okay. You shouldn't really be using bows or tomes on Alear. And then with daggers, your only option is either iron or you forge it into a steel, and it does cost you 10 steel and 100 iron to do this. So it's kind of almost like a waste. Like you could just continue upgrading it to some degree, but yeah. But daggers can be good on like a Wolf Knight build if you want to do that. But that's it for my basic Alear guide. Definitely like and subscribe if you found this useful. We're going to be doing these for all the characters. Some of the characters will have more information than others because some characters have more options and other characters are very limited. But yeah, thanks for checking this out, and I'll see you in the next one.